Ever feel like, like there's this whole other part of you in your head kind of calling the shots sometimes?
Okay, maybe not literally, but today's deep dive might just have you wondering, how well you really know your own brain. We're going deep into the world of split brain research.
We're talking 1960s, groundbreaking stuff by Sperry and Gazzaniga.
Right.
They were studying patients who had undergone a pretty radical procedure, having their corpus callosum, that's the bridge between the two halves of your brain,
Yeah.
surgically severed.
And it's not like this was done lightly. This is a last resort for folks with really severe epilepsy that, nothing else had worked for.
Right.
But it created this really, really unique opportunity to study what happens when the two halves of the brain, they can't talk to each other directly anymore.
Yeah. Like, are these patients basically running on two minds now? And how do they even function day to day? Was it just chaos?
Well, that's the thing that's so amazing about it. For the most part, these patients seem surprisingly normal. Their intelligence, their personality, even their emotions, all pretty much the same.
So no, like, sudden Jekyll and Hyde transformations or anything?
Not quite. But here's the catch. Because their corpus callosum was cut, their hemispheres were basically processing information in isolation.
Okay.
It was like, imagine having these two highly specialized departments in a company, but they've completely stopped communicating.
Okay, I'm hooked. But how in the world did researchers actually figure out what each hemisphere was doing all on its own? I mean, brains are usually pretty good at keeping their secrets.
Well, that's where the ingenuity of these researchers comes in, right? They came up with these really clever visual tests.
Okay.
So imagine this, presenting an image to only one hemisphere at a time.
Hold on. How is that even possible? How do you show something to just one side of the brain?
By controlling which eye sees the image. Because each of your eyes, it actually sends information to the opposite side of the brain, remember?
Oh.
So by manipulating which eye saw what, they could basically have a direct line to just the left or just the right hemisphere.
That's crazy. That's so clever. So what happened? I mean, when they did that, did the other side of their brain just totally blank out?
You think so, right?
Yeah.
But what they found was so much more nuanced and so much weirder than anyone could have imagined.
So they're showing images to just one eye at a time. What kind of images are we talking about here? Like, what were the patients actually seeing?
Well, they started with some pretty basic things, simple shapes, maybe a word, sometimes even just flashes of light on a board.
Okay.
And this is where things start to get really interesting, because when they flashed lights, say, to the left visual field, that meant the right hemisphere was processing it right.
Right.
And a lot of times those patients couldn't actually tell you verbally that they'd seen anything.
Really?
It was like that part of their visual world just didn't even register.
Wow. So did they think they had gone blind in that eye, or?
You'd think so, right? But here's the wild part. When they were asked to point to where they thought the lights had been, they could accurately point to the lights that had been shown to either side.
Wait, so even though they couldn't say, hey, I saw that, something in their brain was still processing that information?
Precisely. And that was a major clue that the right hemisphere, it was processing the visual information, but it just couldn't express it verbally. It was like, you ever have that tip of the tongue feeling?
Yeah, for sure.
It's like that, but for your entire visual field.
Wow. So it wasn't just seeing, it was like understanding was a separate thing going on.
Exactly. It really challenged this idea that seeing and knowing are always the same thing.
So they used visual tests. Did they use any other senses? Like, what about touch?
Yeah, they did these really cool tactile tests, too.
Okay.
So imagine a patient. They would feel an object with one hand, let's say their left hand, but they wouldn't be able to see it.
So that information is going to the right side of the brain.
Exactly. And again, they found this kind of disconnect. The patients could easily pick out that same object from a group of objects just by touch.
Wow.
But they couldn't name it.
Huh.
Their right hemisphere, it knew what it was feeling, but it couldn't communicate that verbally.
It's like their brain was playing charades with itself or something. That's so strange. But how do we know the right hemisphere really understands? I mean, if it can't talk, how do we know it's not just reacting on instinct or something?
Well, they took things a step further.
Yeah.
They designed these even more intricate experiments to really try to test the limits of this nonverbal understanding that seemed to be going on in the right hemisphere.
Okay.
And the most famous one is probably the heart experiment. Have you heard about that?
Oh, yeah. That's like the big one, right?
Yeah.
The most famous split brain research experiment. So the heart experiment, lay it on me. How do they use that word to unlock more secrets about the brain?
Okay, so picture this. They flashed the word heart on a screen,
Okay.
but they do it with a little twist.
Oh.
He appears on the left side of the screen, which goes to the right hemisphere, and Art appears on the right side, going to the left hemisphere.
Sneaky. So, did they put the word together? Or were they just totally confused? What happened?
Well, when they asked the patients what they saw, they would say Art.
Right, because that went to the left brain, which is usually better with language.
Exactly. But here's the really cool part. When they asked the patients to point with their left hand,
Which is controlled by the right hemisphere.
right, they would point to HE.
No way. So even though they couldn't say it out loud, the right hemisphere was understanding the written word E.
Exactly. It turns out that the right hemisphere isn't just passively taking in these sights and sounds, it's actually working to understand them, maybe even forming its own interpretations. Who knows?
It really does make you wonder if, like, those times when you have a gut feeling about something but you can't explain why, maybe that's your right hemisphere trying to tell you something.
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? And
Yeah.
it really challenges this idea we have of ourselves as this single unified self.
It makes you think twice about those, like, personality tests that say you're a left brain or right brain person.
Totally. I mean, those
I-
tests can be fun, but they really oversimplify things. A healthy brain is all about integration. Think about something like reading a book.
Ooh, yeah, one of my favorite things.
So as you're looking at those words on the page, your left hemisphere is busy decoding the language, right?
Right.
It's following the narrative and analyzing everything. But at the same time, your right hemisphere is working on those more visual elements, like imagining what the characters and the scenes look like, picking up on the emotional tone, and understanding the bigger picture themes.
Wow. It's like a beautifully choreographed dance going on in there that we don't even realize. It's not really two separate brains battling it out, but it's this incredibly complex partnership working together.
That's a great way to put it. And the coolest thing is, this research didn't just change how we think about the brain, but it actually had real-world applications too, especially for things like treating brain injuries.
Oh, wow. How so?
Well, because this research showed us how specific functions are lateralized, which means mostly handled by one side of the brain or the other.
Go?
It helped us to understand how to better target therapies. For example, if someone had a stroke that affected the left side of their brain, we might focus more on language exercises, knowing that their right hemisphere could still hold memories and emotions.
That's incredible. This research from all the way back in the 1960s is still helping us today. So for everyone listening, what's the one big takeaway you hope they remember about split brain research?
I think the biggest takeaway is that our brains are way more complex and way more incredible than we often give them credit for.
For sure.
There's this whole other world of processing and understanding, even decision-making happening behind the scenes. And we're only just beginning to scratch the surface of what it all means.
It's like we have this amazing, powerful, and slightly mysterious partner living inside our own heads. And the more we learn about it, the more we discover about what it means to be human. If you're as fascinated by all of this as we are, make sure to check out the show notes for some more resources to explore. And until next time, keep on exploring the wonders within.